facility safety or ops, you know the landscape changes fast. New safety solutions, updated grounding procedures, and the constant push for better leadership. It's a lot to keep up with. That's where Incident Prevention Magazine comes in. We are the industry's go-to source for real-world safety solutions. From in-depth articles on arc flash protection to ready-to-use tailgate topics for your crew, IP gives you the knowledge, insight, and strategy you need to get everyone home safe. Don't just react to the job, stay ahead of it. Subscribe today at incidentprevention.com. That's incidentprevention.com.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, Safety by Design with Pam Tompkins, who we're following her article series in Incident Prevention Magazine. This will be the fourth installment, Safety by Design, Human and Organizational Performance, or HOP. Pam, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Nick. I'm really excited to be here as always and excited to be with you today.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. We know you're very busy over at Set Solutions, and we appreciate you spending some time with us. So I just wanted to go through and, discuss, we've all heard of HOP principles, I believe, in human and organizational performance. But for listeners who may not know this term, can you start by just explaining the basics of what HOP is and the important philosophy in the workplace of safety?
Absolutely. Honestly, I could talk for days about this topic. And I said this in the article, but it's so important. And once I found out about HOP, it just kind of changed my whole world, my whole thought in how to integrate safety into an organizational effectively. So let me just bare bone talk about it. And HOP to me is just a much better way to understand kind of how employees that are working within our organizations really are working, because they're in these very complex, these really high risk environments every day. So we've got to better understand about that. To me, it kind of represents a complete, and I want to highlight and underline the word complete shift from what I always talk about as far as traditional or compliance-based safety programs, which assumes that employee knows the rules, they're trained, and that they're going to just be 100% perfect all the time, never making a mistake. So it's like the total opposite of that. So in the HOP world, it really focuses on how the systems, and all these articles have talked a lot about systems, the processes that we build out that support everything within our organization. I'll use the word the pressures that we have within the organization to get work completed on time. And another one is the work environment. They all influence us as humans, our employees, the behavior that happens in all around this process. So we talk about eras, and to me, it's really commonly mistakes. They are definitely not human failures. They're just a part of us being a human being, and we're going to make those mistakes. So HOP matters because it really helps an organization shift from a blaming people about everything that's happening within the organization to improving the system that protects the employee from making those mistakes. So when you protect the employee, you ensure that your culture, which is how people work within your organization, it becomes much stronger and much more resilient. So this is like one of the most important things that fit effectively within a safety system. You've got to have this HOP component to ensure that everything is working effectively.
Yeah, and I think you kind of covered another question I was thinking was, you talk about a fundamental flaw with a blame-centric approach, and what I heard you say was, you kind of create when you move away from that, you create a stronger bond organization when you instead of just going after and blaming someone for an issue, for something that went wrong, a mistake that was made. Um, can you talk a little bit about that? Just expand on that.
So, absolutely, I, I think that organizations really have to understand that blaming people doesn't fix anything. It's very plain and it's very simple. I can fix a system that supports the employee, but I will never ever fix an employee. And a lot of times we're just constantly in this cycle of blaming an employee, trying to fix an employee when we can never fix people. So, these traditional programs assume that if someone makes a mistake, that the person ignored a rule, they lacked motivation or really they didn't care. But in reality, most employees within all of our organizations, they are doing the very best they can under so many different conditions. They have to deal with things like timelines, tools and equipment, procedures. A big one is production pressure. Hey, one of the big ones for me is the fatigue, and extreme environmental conditions. And, there's just so many more that our folks are dealing with out on these job sites every single day. So when we blame the individual, we are overlooking a major, major fix by looking at the system that set them up for failure. So if you don't fix the system, and I want to highlight, underline, get people really thinking about this. If you don't fix the system, the exact same thing will happen again. And most likely it it is with a different person, but it could be with the same person. And if you're a more large organization, it could happen so many different times within the organization. So it's this blame-centric approach gets an organization nowhere.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand. I really what hit home is, with the person, they don't necessarily want to make the mistake, but there's so many outside variables, like climate. We know that some of these areas being affected or have more extreme weather than normal. You could have home personal stuff, deadlines, both personally and professionally. There's a lot of things and tools. This industry is growing, and the amount of tools that are changing and new technology being involved in the workplace, all of these things are stressors. All of these things are variables that can play on somebody as they're doing the job. So I think that was important that you brought that up. And you talk about the five principles of HOP, and I want to go through those and highlight those with you real quick. And principle one is people will make mistakes, which is what we were just talking about. Seems obvious, but in the context of safety, it feels radical. It feels like this shouldn't belong, right? But why is it so important to state this at first? And how does accepting human fallibility change the organization's entire approach to safety?
Yeah, so such an important thing to say out loud, um, because for decades in organizations, electric power organizations, because we're focusing on them right now, but in all organizations, the safety world was more about, thinking of safety as people making these mistakes, and that they have a opportunity just by saying, "Hey, I'm not going to make a mistake," for a mistake not to occur. So honestly, this is crazy thinking, but that's how the industry has been. So when we accept that humans will, okay, so I'm going to highlight and underline that word too, will make mistakes, especially in those high risk work areas. And honestly, I say this all the time, our folks are in those areas so many times of the day. So troubleshooting is a really big one. So when you think about a worker in the electric power world, you put them into troubleshooting, which is probably, 50 to 75% of the work process that folks do. It escalates the risk level to extreme levels. You immediately begin to think about this and start designing better, fail-safe, more realistic procedures and stronger controls as those risk levels start escalating. Honestly, it just removes blame from the workplace when you're doing this. And when you do that, employees really start or stop hiding near misses. That is such a major identifier of where a culture is within an organization. If folks are actually talking about things that are happening within their work area. Um, Leaders stop searching for somebody to blame is another very big piece of this. So leaders are educated. They understand the importance of looking at a system that's supporting that employee to work safely, other than just going after an employee and blaming them for what happened. And honestly, kind of the last point that I want to make here is that the whole organization shifts from fear to a learning environment. And if our organizations can shift from fear to learning, you will see a massive change in how the cultural shift of an organization starts or escalates, I guess is the word. Because culture to me is directly um, attached to this shifting from fear to learning.
I like that. And what I heard you say is when employees are not worried about the consequences of a near miss or a mistake, you kind of empower them, which ultimately empowers your safety program to better identify what needs to be changed, what needs to be looked at when employees are actively sharing, the issues, the near misses, the things that are going on versus hiding them from you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we'll move into principle 2 here. And error likely situations are predictable. You mentioned error traps in your article and error precursors, which I'm assuming, don't judge me, is a near miss. But can you give us some real world examples of what an error trap looks like in the utility environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So an air trap to me is something that sets somebody up for an error to occur. So I'm going to give you some conditions that could happen and are happening within utilities. The first one that I'm pulling out is, let's go to, I've got an employee who has worked many days consecutively. And many days, maybe 16 hours or more, a utility may have a work rule that says an employee can't work over 16 hours. But they may be pushing that just a little bit. But they've worked for days under this kind of environment during a storm restoration. And honestly, the utility is saying, we're almost to the end. We're almost to the end. So we're going to push the limit. We're going to push the limit. To me, that is a major error trap, because us as a human, even though our employees within our organizations, they're willing to accept a higher risk level. Just think of what you're doing to an employee. You're pushing them to make decisions in such a high risk environment, because we're in a troubleshooting restoration world, and we're putting all of this on top of an employee and expecting them just to make the best decisions. That one to me is a major one. I see that so many times playing out in a utility, because I ask these questions as we go in for assessments. And folks say, well, it's really hard to determine when and how much support staff we need to pull in to make this work. Well, all that is a developed process ahead of time, is what has to occur. Another one that I really want to bring up is a task that's not been completed in a long time, and now I'm under pressure. I've got to get it completed. So I use the analogy so many times in training of a mobile substation that's not been put into service for over a year, and now we've got an event that has occurred, and my crew is told to go out, get the mobile sub, and get it back into service immediately. All right, so another one might be an error trap, is a switching order that is not based on three-part communication, or which is another one that's very tough for a process to occur, is a switching order that has multiple tasks within one step. So somebody's given a switching order, they go out, and on each step they've got multiple tasks that they have to perform, and there is no checks and balances. They just go out. Once they finish those tasks, it could be 5 things in that step. They go out and complete those. Then they just call back and say, hey, to the system operator, this is complete. To me, that is a major error likely situation. And the last one that I want to talk about is you've got a crew that is going out, and they are working in a underground residential neighborhood. They've got a lot of troubleshooting that's going on, and an employee just assumes that they've taken a piece of equipment, let's just say it's the switch cabinet, out of service, and assumes that somebody completed a visual inspection at an open point. Error likely situation. All these things that I talk about here could be prevented in a situation where people are talking about this ahead of time, and these situations are predictable. Because the people doing the work, they often are already thinking, hey, we need a better process for this, or we need people talking about this better, but hey, this is the way we've always done it, so I guess this is the way we do it. Those are some major ones that I pulled out. Of course, they're happening out on our job sites daily, and it's just important to understand how these traps are occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. Going into principle 3 here, all human actions are influenced by the context. You gave a great example in your article of workers being safe only when the safety guy, and I'll use that in quotations, is watching. How does an organization begin to fix that cultural context that undervalues safety, and where do you even start?
Yes. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to go back to this, what I was just talking about with these error likely situations.
Mhm.
I, I did not interject this. I think it's a very important piece that, we've got to better listen to folks that are out in the field, um, because the leaders out there play such an important role in helping identify these error likely situations. So some simple ways I think that can happen out on the job site is just things like asking frontline leaders, what's going to make our job, or our frontline leaders actually asking what's going to make our job hard today, or what are we doing that is going to have a lot higher risk involved in it. So some things like asking pre-job discussions about these error traps, building trust in folks to actually talk about things that are actually happening out on the job sites. So to me, that trust is so important, and it's not something that is going to occur overnight. It is constant actions and clear communication that will actually help build trust within an organization. And that active listening and feedback is going to help also establish trust within the organization. So thank you for letting me kind of go back and talk about that. I will say that when we talk about human actions and how they're influenced and how we can fix cultures that are undervalued, I'll say that it starts by addressing the conditions that drive the behavior, not just the behavior itself. So if a employee only follows safety rules when and I'll put this kind of in quotes, safety guy, safety person is around, that really tells you the real culture in that organization. And the real culture is production driven culture. And I think that you really have to start looking at, there's about three things that are really major in this area to look at. And one is leadership modeling. So if our leaders are not strong out on our job sites, so people are watching those leaders, our employees are. So if a leader or supervisor goes out and bypasses something, a major step, like looking at or verifying an open point, then honestly, the crew's going to do the exact same thing. So that leadership modeling is such an important thing. Um, the second one I see is just clarifying priorities. Um, Employees, they've got to see that meeting a deadline, meeting a timeline, that they're being pushed is never going to outrank going home. Now, I go in organizations all the time, and senior leaders say, we never, ever do that with our employees. And you get out in the field, and there's such a different mismatch that field employees feel pressured to get jobs done. And pressure a lot of times could be just by even a system operator, or it could be an operational manager that calls to find out, when is power going to be restored? That sends a message to an employee basically saying, hey, this is more important than us getting it done safely. The third one is fixing operational gaps. So there's so many operational gaps for us that are consultants within this industry. We see so many things, but a few of the things that definitely we see is unclear procedures or missing procedures or rules. that folks just have to figure out what to do. Or it could be that they were written so many years ago that they don't even apply to the work being done in today's world. Not having enough people to do the job is a major one. So another major one is equipment that is so old and has not been serviced in so many years, or equipment that is having damage occur due to environmental conditions. So there's so many things on the equipment side that utilities can do a really good job of, that will help support employees to work safer. When one of the major things in electrical safety in the world today is, we talk about, if the equipment's not maintained, then you have the risk to an employee working on that equipment goes extreme compared to equipment that has been serviced, that's maintained effectively, and all the things that go along with that. So, all these things, you're going to see culture changes when these three major things are happening within organizations. Because culture changes when you change the environment that the people that are in your organization are working in, then you're going to see major cultural shifts toward a positive side of the house happen. So once again, leadership modeling, clarifying priorities, and building systems out around that, and fixing operational gaps. And that one is a lot, but people have to start looking at it.
Yeah, and creating that culture like we discussed about earlier, and I when you were talking about the equipment, maybe some folks don't speak up like, hey, this hasn't been serviced properly or whatever, because that culture um doesn't foster that type of discussion with the higher ups. But I think if what we're talking about with hot principles, you can actually allow and empower even low level workers to speak up about unsafe equipment, unsafe practices, or working environments, by fostering those hot principles at your organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is important that people speak up and are in an environment where they feel empowered to speak up.
Absolutely. So principle 4, operational upsets, which we kind of covered here a little bit, but um, operational upsets can be avoided. You emphasize learning from daily work, not just major incidents. What are some practical ways a team can learn from work every day without it becoming a huge administrative burden?
Yeah. So, a lot of times we think about this is just more stuff to have more stuff to have more stuff. I will say it is not like that. It's not having more stuff or some big meeting or some thick form that you have to fill out. Honestly, is very quick and simple thoughts and patterns and methods that you put in place daily. So some of them could be, or a few of these. I've got about 4 that I want to share with you.
Okay.
One is a 2-minute after action review at the tailgate. Hey, we just finished our job. Let's all meet over at the tailgate before we go on to the next one. Let's just talk about what went right, what went wrong, what can we do better. Let's have this discussion. And a lot of folks think that, hey, or say that these discussions are happening. But if we have them happening on our job sites daily, we would see a lot of information that can go back and actually help fix operational gaps. A lot of things will come up that we never even thought about that are in that context of operational gaps that organizations could actually do something about. So that sharing among the organization is a very big one. And it could be as simple as, teams getting together or crews getting together in the morning that are doing like work and just sharing some small lessons that they're learning, maybe through their work during the previous day, or it could be during the previous week. But having those learning events and sharing events is very important. And then I've got something that, we talk about this in the HOP world. We talk about these learning teams, and learning teams are just, I put folks together to kind of focus on particular areas, but I say have informal learning teams. We brought up during our tailgate that, hey, we had maybe some issues with a new piece of equipment that all of us were not maybe as well trained on as we needed to be. So in this informal learning team, we take that and then we say, hey, how can we all get through maybe the effective training, but how can we kind of hold each other kind of accountable through this process after we've had this tailgate discussion? We figured out that, hey, we need to get better at this. So we need to hold each other kind of accountable for that too. So I think that when we talk about this, the key is going to be consistency throughout the organization. Putting things in place that are consistent, and that your frontline leaders, your middle managers, your senior leaders are all kind of talking the same talk. So if you're going to come up with this 2-minute after action review at the tailgate, then you want to show how that's done. You want to then get that information out throughout your organization. This is a way that we're going to start learning and growing. So this is what we're going to put in place. So daily learning does build a safer system far more effectively than waiting for something to happen within your organization. When you just sit around and wait, honestly, things are going to happen. But you've got to have proactive things put in place. And these are a few things. There's so many other ones out there, but they can definitely bring a lot to the table for an organization.
Absolutely. So we'll move into principle 5 that you discussed in your article, is how we respond to failure matters. And that's a statement, not a question. And I agree with that, but this feels like the most critical point. Can you contrast a negative or punishing response to a failure with a positive learning focused response? And what does that positive response actually look like in the field?
Yes. So punishing behavior or a punishing response sounds like this. All right, who messed up? I don't understand why this employee didn't follow the rule. Let's think about what we're going to do to discipline this employee because it was all their fault. And within all of our organizations, I will tell you that is happening. As a consultant, we see it all the time. Well, it's hard not to blame somebody because, they knew the rule. They knew they had to comply with the rule, and they just didn't do it. So how can you look at something beyond that? So I want to give you just some thoughts on this. Instead of taking that approach, let's take a learning focused approach. And instead of saying who messed up, we want to look at some responses maybe that sound like, all right, so let's start out by walking me through what happened. So let's look at what happened. Then other things might be like what conditions were out there or what type of traps were out there that made the mistake more likely to occur. And, how can we change the system so that this doesn't happen again? So when you're talking about that, you're in a learning focused environment. Like we're not just trying to blame people, but we're trying to really learn from this. So when you do that within an organization and you do it repeatedly, all right. So, and that is a very important piece that the organization has to get to that level, and it has to get to that level throughout the organization. You're going to start building trust within your organization when this is happening. You're also going to have employees that start speaking up because they really are in an environment where they're not just getting beat up, that people are listening. And that safety then becomes a shared responsibility. And it's not just the safety department's responsibility to keep people safe, that everybody within an organization trust folks that when things happen, things within the organization gets done to fix it and to keep it from happening again. So a positive response doesn't ignore accountability. It simply focuses on the system rather than the person. And I've always said that, once again, you can't fix the people, but you can fix that system that is supporting those folks to work safely. Such an important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone who, is hearing this podcast today, they like what they hear, they think it makes sense, and they're connecting with it, with these hot principles. What is the most practical thing tomorrow, that they can start to do? It may be small, it may be big, but what can they start to do tomorrow to implement this?
So one of the major things is asking a simple question, and it could be starting with your frontline leaders, or your frontline employees, frontline leaders and frontline employees, because you may get some different dynamic there. What part of your job is most likely to hurt someone, and what gets in the way of doing it safely? I think that organizations, if they could do that, they could listen and they could act on what they're being told, and you will do that every single day, then you are going to be practicing HOP at its finest by learning and by listening first, learning and acting.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then what do you see, when you're visiting utilities, as a consultant? What kind of pushback or challenge do folks get when they try to adopt or implement the HOP philosophy?
Well, it goes right back to what we were just talking about blame, because blame is very familiar and it's fast. It feels like, hey, I can get rid of the problem
Mhm.
when I blame. So that one is definitely a very big challenge. And, another, I think, kind of challenge or pushback is HOP actually forces leaders to slow down, to listen, to understand what's happening, and to take action to fix what's happening. And that action sometimes can be very dynamic within those systems. So honestly, it just requires humility and patience. And two things that not every organization has built into its culture. But these two things really have to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I was just thinking about this. Really, it's I mean, you said the humility part, which was on my mind, but also, critically thinking about, blame is easy to jump to, it's fast. Um, but critical thinking of how did this actually happen? It's not just, hey, Dave's an idiot or whatever, or Dave didn't follow the rule. Um, Critically thinking about what took place, slowing down as a leader, um, I think is important. Being more calculated is always a good approach. And I think we've answered this question, but finally, as a company, as an employee of a company that, embraces HOP principles, how does that feel for an employee?
Yeah. Honestly, it feels like I trust the organization that I work for. And that really matters within an organization if you are trying to improve your culture. Many organizations say they're trying to improve culture, but it all comes down to trust. And it's tough because, if an employee has had their trust breached, and it could have been 10 years ago, that organization really has to be strong in the way that they address that and moving forward for this to actually happen. Employees in a true HOP environment, they have to feel totally supported. They have to feel respected, and honestly, they have to genuinely be a part of the safety process, not just the target of safety, like somebody going after them because they're not doing something. Um, Day to day, the work is going to be calmer, more predictable, and more collaborative. And at the end of the day, in the world of safety, I really want to say this is that safety's not just a word. It is action items. We have to be better, and we have to strengthen our organizations through action so that people can go home safely. I've said this in other podcasts and in many articles that I write, that I ask the question always to folks, well, what is safety? And, the end result is certainly people getting to go home safely at the end of the day. But hey, there's so many action items that have to occur, and everybody within the organization, from the senior leader to the person that just came on board, plays an important role in this. And I think that HOP kind of addresses so many things. Safety by design is such an important piece, but HOP addresses and supports safety by design effectively within our organizations. And all these are action items that have to be put in place, and it's a design process. So I think that the myth of human perfection is something that safety by design, HOP supports, and I just wish and hope the best for organizations that are trying to improve their culture, that they would do this through an effective safety by design process and integrating HOP into that.
Yeah, I agree. And everything we've talked about, can be used not just in the utility safety world, but in your home life, your between friends, your professional life, even if you're more office driven. Hot principles and not jumping to blame are really something that can help foster that culture of success, no matter what you're doing. So, Pam, I really appreciate you spending the time with us and diving into your article. We're going to be following up on the next one, which will be the fifth installment of implementation and operation. with that, I'll leave it if you have any final thoughts, and thank you for doing this.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity, and I'm going to be really looking forward to our next podcast and hope that people chime into that, because it is going to lay out a lot about the organization, and it's really going to hit on some of the things that we talked about in fixing those operational gaps, because that's one of the major areas that can really change culture within an organization.
Absolutely. And look for Pam's email address in the podcast description if you have any questions for her about her article series or maybe some training. Visit CUSSolutionsLLC.com to find additional information there as well. And until next time, we appreciate you being with us, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Join us for the IPI Forum, a monthly event designed for utility safety and ops professionals. Each session brings expert insights on industry topics, trends, and best practices from leaders like David McPeak and Jim Vaughn. Register once and stay connected to a network of peers, ready to share knowledge and solutions. Don't miss this free opportunity. Secure your spot today and earn 1 certification point. Visit ip-institute.com to learn more and register.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.